Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrient Ag Solutions, and I want to thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. One of the maps I'm starting off all my weather briefings with this week is this one here that shows the maximum 10-meter wind gust, so that's the winds about 30 feet above our heads, that we saw during the last week of the month of November, so the 24th through December the 1st. When you look across the country, the extremely active pattern which we saw in the Carolinas kind of come to a head over our Thanksgiving weekend here brought some incredibly windy conditions. And I just want you to make sure you see this. This range I'm kind of circling down here is the 50 to 55 mile an hour gust range. And we can see that parts of the Appalachian Mountains certainly saw wind speeds that fast. Much of the interior parts of the Carolinas here getting away from the coast did see, between 15 and 30 mile an hour winds at times, but coastal regions saw some pretty incredible winds there with some of the gusts getting up approaching that 50 mile an hour mark with some of the more powerful systems that went through at the end of last week. But just to show you, look at this system that came in here off of the northwest, came in Northern California here in Southern Oregon with wind speeds at 100 miles an hour. So that's going to be, the reason why I'm starting with, that's going to be the area that we're going to watch carefully, because even though our pattern this week is relatively benign, I don't see a lot of precipitation coming, and I don't see certainly any major windstorms on their way again. It's California that's going to kind of tell us how things are going to shape up, because the system that was born there that moved out into the Central Plains over the weekend and eventually pushed itself off to the northeast where it's still causing problems today is what gave us a lot of the rains we're seeing here in the Carolinas, where near the Appalachian Mountains we saw better than 3 inches, and it slowly kind of amounts decreased as you got over toward the coast, where in coastal regions we saw less than an inch. South Carolina was a little bit drier as these systems kind of raced on off to the northeast. We don't get the strong fronts that pass through, the far southeastern part of the United States. We got to have systems that either dig in like this before they turn, or come out of the Gulf of Mexico and race up the East Coast. That's the difference in trajectory between our low pressure systems, those that bring a lot of rainfall to us, and those during this time of year that don't bring very much. So just to let you know, the northern plains got socked again here with a lot of snowfall. So this is just looking at the total snow accumulation through the weekend. And basically, when you add it all up, these are the numbers we have so far this year. So the Intermountain West is picking up some snow, which they desperately need. They're certainly behind. But we have parts of the north central plains where corn and soybeans are still sitting in the fields that have had so far since September 30th 4 feet to 5 feet of snow in some places. It's incredible. Well, what's our pattern look like this week? Well, it's going to start off again with the focus on the West Coast. We will be discussing some changes in the Pacific jet stream, but right now it's doing something a bit like this. So we have this low that's sitting here that's going to be moving slowly off to the northeast, and that's why still in the Appalachian Mountains today we are dealing with some winter weather advisories and winter storm watches. But it's this piece again in California that's going to be most critical through our week. And California is going to get beat on pretty hard this week, which means much of us for the rest of the country and the eastern half of the country are going to have a relatively benign week ahead of us. So let's kind of get into what these details look like, starting off first with our all hazards weather map. So we can see here the region that we're most concerned with today as the current low pressure system goes spinning on off to the north and east, with still our winter weather advisories that are out in place through parts of the Appalachian Mountains. And the colors that you see here in parts of South Carolina and here in parts of Virginia and North Carolina, these are wind advisories that we still have out for today. So this last system, as it kind of goes kicking and screaming off the northeast, still bringing in some blustery conditions here. So what are we anticipating? Well, this gets you all the way out to next Friday evening. Total accumulated precipitation's over there on the left from the European model. And again, a lot of this is kind of sneaking through today, and there's a little system coming through on Friday this week, but I'll show you that in a few minutes and in terms of how much I'm anticipating. But snowfall, today we may be picking up in parts of the higher elevations here on the border of North Carolina and Tennessee, potentially up to 6 inches of snowfall. But again, that's pretty deep in the mountains, and that is certainly going to be on the westward facing slopes. So other than that, while our temperatures kind of hover in the mid-50s a lot this week, with overnight lows getting down into the 30s, it's a relatively boring week. That's because California is where all the action is. Take a look at this kind of blown up here. This is looking over the next 5 days, again, getting out to next Friday evening. You can see that it's the West Coast that's going to be seeing a lot of precip. We do have a couple of systems to talk about, though, that will skirt through, and then I think next Monday is our next big rainfall event. So let's kind of take a look at what that looks like here in our operational run of the European model. Playing this one forward, you saw it. System number 1 right there going finally off the East Coast, bringing with it some light precipitation here for the Carolinas. After that, northwest flow cooling things down to start off this week. But we will notice by the time we get into Wednesday and eventually into Thursday, temperatures attempt to moderate a little bit, warm up a little bit. But notice no weather systems through Thursday into Friday morning to really talk about. The only one I'm going to mention here is that Friday morning, a little shortwave comes through the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas and gets to the lower Mississippi River Valley. But then as it moves over toward the East Coast, the best thing it might give us Friday evening into Saturday morning is just some light showers. That's not much. Or high pressure builds in too quickly behind this. Now, this is the high pressure cell we need to be watching for next week. So watch it right here over Ohio, move just off the coast. And you know, whenever we see big areas of high pressure here, they funnel in moisture in a clockwise direction around them. So Sunday evening, getting into Monday morning, this is our next big chance at precipitation. So relatively quiet week ahead of us here as we're watching all the action happen out west. It won't be until next Monday before one of those deeper shortwaves that comes in along the west coast finally gets into the Midwest, and we start to draw in moisture around it, which is what you see right here. Now the question is, how robust of a solution is this? So let me just show you. Over here on the right, I have that same snapshot from the European model. You can see where the low pressure center is sitting and the high pressure cell sitting off the coast, kind of funneling that moisture in, giving us a very wet start to the beginning of next week. Your GFS has the same features here in place. So we can see some pretty good model agreement. And not only that, but our old ensemble model also says it. So this is the European ensemble looking at mean sea level pressure differences. And what I want you to notice here is that in this area, see how those L's? That's a different simulation from the European model saying, hey, it looks as though low pressure development will be happening in that area. And this ridge sitting just off the coast will be the feeder system into this. So again, this is the start of next week. Now, after that starts, look at what we end up getting for week 2. GFS ensemble here, European there. You can see that the entirety of the eastern part of the United States is kind of under the gun for a more active pattern. We have to answer the question as to why that is the case. Now, generally when we see this, the jet stream pattern wants to do something a bit more like this and be fed by a strong subtropical branch. And that basically comes together in this area, giving us active low pressure development and hence a lot of precipitation as we now enter into what is called meteorological winter. That usually begins right around December 1st. So here it is. Let's take a look at the upper level flow pattern by doing a little intermodal comparison. GFS ensemble on the left, European on the right. And what are you looking at? Well, the blues here represent troughs, therefore unsettled weather and cooler weather. The ridges are in the warmer colors. So certainly today we're dealing with this deeper trough sitting over area. That's the windy conditions, the snow in the mountains, and some light rain spreading across the Carolinas early this morning on Monday. But as I play this forward, that trough finally wraps up in the northeast. But behind it, both models are pretty clear that we're going to be starting off the week with some cooler than average conditions sitting in this trough. Now, where do we go from there? Well, things just kind of moderate and get boring. You see, being on the backside of a trough generally just means some cooler weather, but not much precipitation. We do know that by the end of the week, I just played for you, by the way, all the way to Thursday evening. It's this trough here we're going to watch next as it sneaks through the lower Mississippi River Valley, and then by Friday afternoon tries to bring in a chance at precip here in the Carolinas, but not much. You saw the precip totals through the end of the week are relatively light. And then as we get into the weekend, well, what we notice here is that the trough is established over the Hudson Bay, drags all the way down here to the Four Corners states, and out ahead of that, coming out of this trough into this ridge is where we get the low pressure system development. So this is the funneling into the moisture. This is the wetter start to next week. Now, why does it stay that way? Well, what we notice here in our longer term models is this. You see, getting you all the way out to 2 weeks from now. So this is way out there to Friday, December the 13th. Both models are picking up on this deeper trough here. And again, that jet stream pattern is doing this. And that particular setup just tends to make more low pressure systems in this area. So the following week, beginning on this Monday, getting you through Friday the 13th here, I'm seeing multiple chances here of us getting systems that kind of come out of the south central plains and race toward the northeast, and as a result bring in some wetter conditions. So that's why the week 2 time period is looking wet. Dynamically, it is a sound forecast from both of our models. So bigger picture, these are some of the changes I'm watching. Pacific jet stream becoming a bit more zonal. Subtropical jet stream, taken off. You can see it right in through there. And that's a pattern that tends to leave in our cold season here into December, January, February, very active East Coast United States. So very clear signals there coming from the Pacific. What does this mean towards temperatures? Well, we know the deeper trough is in place to start off our week. So through the next 5 days, yes, temperatures moderate, but overall, we're on the cooler side of things. GFS and European both agreeing on that pattern. What about days 6 through 10? Things are much closer to what we call our climatological normals at that time as the cold air really reloads up here in central Canada. You can see it in both forecasts. But the only difference is getting out here to week 2. You see, the GFS is a bit more progressive with the trough bringing it a little bit further to the east, whereas the European model wants to keep a lot colder air up here and a lot flatter pattern overall with a stronger subtropical branch. So both are wet, but the GFS is cooler. That's the big difference as we move into the middle part of the month of December. I'm going to tell you something. We're going to have to watch this all very carefully because this longer range temperature forecast will be complicated by this. You see right now, here between Greenland and Hudson Bay, we have in the stratosphere much higher than normal heights. Now, what does that mean? That means we're pushing the atmosphere up into the stratosphere. It's rising, and it's displacing some colder air there into one piece here and another here. So the polar vortex is disrupted. It's about to split here, it appears, with one piece of it over parts of Siberia, the other piece that's sitting here over parts of Europe. And that's just going to allow us through middle part of the month to probably hang on to our more, I'll just call it, I don't want to call it a mild pattern, but less of the deep freeze stuff that we've been seeing as of late. All right. But this all spins around. And as it comes around and changes the Pacific jet stream, it's going to be impactful on the way the second half of the month of December is going to look. Here's what's going to complicate the second half of the month of December. The Indian Ocean dipole has reached its peak. It has come back down. And by the beginning of the new year, I anticipate to be back into the normal range. Now, what does that mean? That means that the rising motion we've been seeing sitting over Africa will continue through the next 15 days. That's the arrow I just drew there. But it'll be decreasing in intensity. And that's because the sinking motion, which is sitting over Australia and Indonesia, will slowly be weakening. Look at this. By the time we get into the middle part of the month, the Indian Ocean dipole event may be weakened enough that we could allow the Mad-Julian Oscillation to finally get unstuck out of phase 1 and 2 and get moving again. Now, what does all of this mean? Well, this certainly means that this gives the Pacific jet stream in the north, the one that impacts us, a better chance at lengthening out, becoming more zonal, which means west to east, and the subtropical jet stream to get cranking. What I'm trying to tell you here is this pattern is also conducive to a wet East Coast as we get into the second week of the month of December. Okay? Here's what else it means. If we allow the Indian Ocean dipole to collapse, well, the cooler water you see here, which has been formed by a strong wind going that direction in the low levels and a strong wind going in that direction, well, if these wind features collapse and come back together over Indonesia and Australia, that's going to allow this part of the tropical ocean, I think, to cool off a little bit. It will still keep the North Pacific on the warm side of things, but I think we're going to see, again, a strong piece of the jet stream like this and a strong subtropical branch just like that. And this collapsing of the Indian Ocean dipole and the maintenance of some cooler water here off the west coast of South America reinforce that pattern for us, okay? So, putting it all together and finishing this up by giving you a quick global discussion. Right now, this is still dry, but if the Indian Ocean dipole wanes in strength and collapses in January, we'll pop out into phase 3 of the of the Mad-Julian Oscillation. Now, what does all that mean? Well, that means a lot more for South America than it does for North America. I've told you my case for North America. Pacific jet stream, subtropical jet stream, we stay active on the East Coast as we move through the end of December, getting into January. All right? But for South America, it looks something like this. You see, over the next 15 days, the wettest conditions will be stretching from parts of Mato Grosso do Sul over to like Minas Gerais, this region in through here, with dry north and dry south. Now, what we can do to try to understand what this means is come over here to the Vegetation Health Index map. I'm going to let you know something. You can't use this anymore this year to look inside that circle to compare year-on-year vegetation health. There's too much cloud cover in the middle of the day when the satellites snap these pictures, and as a consequence, we can't see down to the leaves to see what their health looks like from space. But outside of that, The drought that has been persistent in Brazil's eastern growing regions and through here, you can see the difference between a year ago compared to this year. And the Mato Grosso do Sul, much drier year this year with all the rains mainly focused to the north of it. Well, that's the area that I'm anticipating some above average precipitation. Down in Argentina, again, we're talking about corn and soybeans initially here. Cordoba, Santa Fe, that region right in central Argentina is looking pretty good right now. Drier to the north, drier to the west, and drier to the south. Much of that entire country is on the drier side for the next 15 days, placing a stress here on some of our newly planted soybeans and corn, as they're going to need some early season precip to germinate and get going here. Overall, what I'm anticipating is if the Indian Ocean dipole collapses, this will be impactful on first crop beans in northern growing regions in Brazil and on full season crops in Argentina. And that's because we're going to pop out into phase 3 of the Matt-Julian oscillation, which is a dry phase for South America. So, moral of the story here is that South America has had a much less than ideal start to the growing season, at least compared to a year ago. And some of the features changing in the Pacific will be impactful on a critical time period in South America, specifically as we're trying to fill out those pods on beans and making plans for planting either corn or cotton as that safrinha crop. So we have got a lot to watch. Tune in next week when I give you the latest update on all of these features. And in the meantime, enjoy the relatively benign week, but prepare for a wet week 2 in the forecast, all right? We'll wrap it up right here. Have a great week, and we will talk to you again soon. Thank you.